Dr. Joanna Tzenis. Dr. Joanna Tzenis is an associate extension professor at the University of Minnesota Center for Youth Development. Joanna's scholarly work and practice are concerned with issues of equity and opportunity in education, an emphasis on youth pathways to higher education, the social cultural foundations of education, and advancing the use of community-engaged research and program design processes. Her dissertation research was a longitudinal study of how Somali youth are agentic in acting towards their educational aspirations. Our current projects use participatory action research methodology to support youth in becoming change agents in their local communities and expanding their future possibilities in and through education. She's going to present a paper on using participatory methods to directly contribute to youth flourishing. After she presented her paper, her discussant will be Professor Mikateko Mathebula. Professor Mikateko Mathebula is an associate professor at the SARChI-HEHD Higher Education and Human Development Research Program, University of Free State, South Africa. Her work examines through a capabilities lens the relationship between processes of higher education, development, and human flourishing in the South African context, with a focus on youth from low-income households and or rural areas. Recently completed projects include the SARChI-HEHD funded photo voice scoping study of the educational trajectories of youth from an informal settlement in the Free State province, and our current NRI-funded project investigates the contribution that universities make to the transformation of the rural communities by exploring, describing, and documenting through narratives the post-university life trajectories of youth from rural areas in the Eastern Cape and the Limpopo. So, Dr. Joanna, over to you, 30 minutes to present your work. Then we give your discussant 10 to 15 minutes to comment on your paper, and then we'll allow members to contribute or to make comments or questions. Over to you.
So, I'm so sorry, my sound is not so good. So if I heard you right, present for a little bit and then engage in questions, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm ready for you all if you are. Is that a yes? It's nice to see your faces in the room. And I say that because pretty soon I'll have to stop seeing your faces. And I'm going to share my screen, and because I'm not at my fancy where I have multiple screens, I won't be able to see you. So if you do need to say something, please interrupt me, because I won't be able to see any faces, that if any read any face expressions or something. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so bear with me for a moment. I am a Zoom user more than a Teams user, so I have to fidget a little bit more. Okay. Can I get a verbal that, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I almost said good morning because it is morning where I am in Minnesota in the US. And I was really grateful for this connection. My colleague, my former advisor, is Joan Jager, who has collaborated and works with Melanie Walker, and that was the connection I had. And I was very grateful to be here, as I've followed this group's work as well, and it's just an honor to be here. So what I'm going to do today, my brown bag is entitled "Supporting Youth Flourishing Through Participatory Methods," and what I'd like to do is really just share with you a current project I'm doing right now, which is a arts-based youth program. Arts-based youth program and study together, which is really the crux of it. And I'm going to spend some time telling you, one, who I am and where I work, because my context in this work matters. I'm not a traditional scholar, if you will. I'm going to spend a lot of the time talking about the study and really the methods. And a lot of this has been new to us in the team. Oh gosh, I have it somehow on like a timed advance and I don't know how to change it, so I'm sorry. And I'm so excited for your comments on this to help us kind of advance our learning as well. And then I'd like to talk about sustaining the impact, because the whole point of this presentation is really talk about how to contribute to youth flourishing, to their thriving through research and through the methods that we use. So just a brief introduction to me. I came across a collection of some photos. I have very few of me in action, but as I said, I am not a tenure track professor. I am not a solid researcher. I am an extension specialist. We've just changed from Center to Youth Development, from the Department of Youth Development at the University of Minnesota. And of course, now I can't see any of your hands, but has anyone heard of the extension system in the US? I'm gonna take the silence as no. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I work at the College of Extension, which our goal is explicitly to do outreach and to connect community and academic resources together, connecting research and practice. So I have a very explicit mission. So I work as a community organizer, I work as a youth worker, I'm a scholar, I earned my PhD while working in this role. I'm an educator, and then I'm also making youth programs happening. So I joke about bringing snacks, taking pictures. It's a very beautifully complex role that's really just rooted in the community, working alongside community members to improve their lives and their communities. So briefly, I work at the University of Minnesota. Well, I'll just say our mission is to make a difference by connecting community needs and university resources to address critical issues in Minnesota. Without giving a long history of extension, but we're part of a Land Grant Institution Act, an act in like 1862, which was to when we were noticing like farmers didn't have the skills they need to grow what they needed, right? So they really wanted to create an entity where there was practical education. It has now become where we work with young people, with families, with agricultural and in communities. In my work specifically is situated in youth development with the 4-H youth development program specifically. Again, any verbals, anyone heard of the 4-H youth development program? No. There you go. It is the largest youth serving organization in the United States. It's began with this Moral Act to help kids living in rural areas to develop skills in agriculture and home economics, so they were prepared with practical skills for their future, and has since evolved into, I mean, we have STEM clubs, robotics, hip hop clubs. This is a group that teaches young elementary students about polymers, and we have citizenship and civic engagement and youth as change agent work, which is the work I'm situated in right here. Happy to answer more about that, but I wanted to give you that context because as I speak about this research, it is within the extension system. So in many ways, it is a youth program model first, and that is all my research and my program is, that we design youth programs, and when we want to understand and learn from these youth programs, whether through evaluation or really trying to generate new knowledge, they're meant to be woven meaningful activities. It's very youth-centered. I am often working alongside community members. So in these photos, this is actually from prior work where I was working with the Somali community in Minnesota. We have the biggest Somali community outside of Africa in Minnesota. And we built a youth program together. I trained youth workers, and we still have youth programs today. And you can see some of the activities the young people were doing as they were thinking about their futures, mapping out their futures, and making vision boards. And then the other important part of my job is that the research I do has to be made accessible and publicly available. So while I do have some publications, in more peer-reviewed journals, I also have many blogs. I develop a practitioner guide, research briefs, even like tip sheets for youth workers. Everything we do at Extension, everything that I do is meant to be accessible, equitably accessible to the community, and anyone kind of like a youth worker and educator that wants to access it can get it. So with that, I'll start to tell you about my current research project, which is called Portraits of Home, and it's an arts-based youth participatory action project. And this is something that is being done in partnership with Extension. And Extension, because we are a place where we can do youth work that's going to stay in the community and have a sustainable impact, as well as with our College of Education and Human Development, more specifically working with Department of Comparative International Development Education, which is also where I received my PhD years ago. And so we are building a youth program together with communities. Here are research questions. You can see them here. How are young people experiencing belonging? What community issues do they care about? And then really studying the youth program. How can this non-formal, out-of-school time, arts-based youth program help young people develop empathy and trust among people who are different than them? Because if you look at these photos here, these photos are actually taken from the same community, the same county, if you will. I'm sure you can tell the very stark contrast where we have a farm. We have a farm, and then not far we have development and houses. This is a community that's rapidly changing. It is the fastest growing county in the state of Minnesota. It's also rapidly diversifying, meaning newcomers to the U.S. are coming. People who live in our twin cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, our capital city. There's like a cascade of families coming outside the city and living, especially in this community. So young people are really having much more different interactions than they've ever had before, which is a beautiful thing. And it's even made the news sometimes with some real racially charged unhealthy interactions. It's had some real tough spots, and in the US, as is well documented, I'm sure, has really been experiencing a lot of divisions, social, political, racial divisions, more than we ever have, but we're in a moment right now. So this program is really meant to foster trust and understanding among people who are different from one another. And this is where I'm so excited for the conversation, is because it is an arts-based youth program and an arts-based research project where we've all been and really working to understand the importance and the utility of arts-based inquiry. At the heart of it, I love this quote. It's the heart of it is a radically politically grounded statement about social justice and control over the production and the dissemination of knowledge. So this is a young people's program. This in many ways it is their research they are creating, and really their voices are at the center. And it's really disrupted some very dominant narratives. I'm excited to share what we've been learning with you. Because I want to focus on methods, I won't go on, but we are drawing from a critical youth empowerment framework, just really understanding youth as assets with power and a voice, and to understand how they feel they belong and how they conceptualize belonging through this program. And here is just a little preview of what's to come of the arts-based experiential methods we've embedded into this program. And we chose arts-based again because it's a catalyst for critical dialogue, reflection, and problem solving, which we've learned young people are really just grasping onto these tools and able to express themselves in ways they haven't really been able to through their own words. And again, to that youth-centered, democratizing research. And I really want to highlight, I should have bolded it, how it allows for messiness and complexity. As someone who's worked in youth work for 15 years now, I'm sure many of you all know too, it is messy. Young people come in with not wanting to talking to, there's just so much, it's not this clean cut study, and you just have to have the tools and the readiness to allow people to express themselves within that mess, if you will. And that's what I loved about the arts-based methods. So I know that was a quick kind of contextualizing, but I, again, wanted to make time to really talk about the methods and then the preliminary findings within. Again, sorry for that timing situation, where, again, we have only done some preliminary analysis. This is our task this summer. And so what I really want to talk about is the methods. And I'm sure many of you in this room know and experience, like when you're doing engaged research, youth participatory action research. Like the methods arguably are what matters most, right? The methods are the ways in which you can make an impact with the young people in that moment. And so we were very intentional to employ a youth development lens when developing these methods and building this program. So the first, I heard I couldn't hear all that was being introduced, but the speaker, the colleague after me, has experience with photo voice as well. We use photo voice as one technique to work with to help young people identify their places of belonging and not belonging in their community. So one, take a look at that photo, the beautiful chaos we had in that room that day. I'll share you more about it. But if you look at this young person, as we're reflecting, saying, photos show that we all have our own space, which is very simple, but very true. For young people to talk about belonging, it's a very abstract concept. But when they were able to take their camera, and what's great is they just have this, they don't need to buy all this technology like you maybe would have even just like 5 years ago. And we ask young people to go out, walk around in your community and find the places where you feel like you can most be yourself, where you feel welcomed and you feel that you belong. And then find the photos that where you maybe don't so much feel that way. And then if I can just explain the methods part of it a little bit more, is they brought in those photos and we were able to just print them off. You can see nothing high tech, which is a colored printer. And the process was young people came into a room, or they sat in small groups, they shared, and I'll show you how we shared a little bit. But they shared their photo, why they took it, what it says to their community, about their community. And then we taught them, we went through this phase where we taught them how to code. And we did candy coding. Won't keep asking you. I'm much more participatory, but if anyone's done candy coding, it's a real simple way to have young people understand the process of coding data, coding photos of how they belong. So like chocolates go with chocolate, or you can have red wrappers go with red wrappers. And then after that process, they began to code their photos. And then we put how they coded the different chunks, if you will, on a wall. And then we told them we had a process where make up a headline. If you can make up a headline about each of these, what would this headline say about your community? And there's so much to say about it, but I wanted to show you, let you zoom in on one young person's, because one of their findings was nature is a place where we can just be. School, you feel so uptight, right? And other places in your community, when I'm not by anyone, I feel like I can just breathe a little bit more. So you see this young person took a picture of a sunrise and they wrote, I feel like this picture tells a bit about my life because I have always been more of an introvert. So when I am alone, I feel like I can just be in the present and enjoy what is happening around me. It's a way for me to just be myself with my inner thoughts, which is to go in my car and watch the sunrise. So I want to be mindful of time. I remember we started late, so I'll keep moving us forward with another method, which, and again, many of these we've adapted and took from youth work curriculum. And this is one, an activity we took from a social emotional learning workbook and adapted for our program, where young people made math. And just to briefly tell you what they did, they sat by a peer, they interviewed their peer to learn about them. We helped generate questions, but they also generated their own. And then they had a time of the day where they just decorated the outside of the mask based on what they learned about their peer, who they didn't know very well. And they were many meeting for the first time. And so they tried to represent what they knew about the person they just met on the outside of the mask. And then in a different session, we came back, they had their mask back, and then they had the opportunity to decorate the inside of their mask, representing aspects of themselves perhaps others don't see or that they don't want to reveal. And this is a really powerful exercise that we did with the young people. If you just take a look at the inside of this mask, you see this young person felt like she doesn't get to reveal part of her cultural identity, and her mental health are all things that she keeps masked. And this really was a springboard for real deep conversations with the young people. And one thing we're learning, and we're diving into more, and perhaps this isn't surprising, but social anxiety was big among all the young people we've spoken to. And in my brevity, we've done this program. We did one pilot and 2 iterations of it. So we're talking about with about 25 young people that have done this program. And with this young person saying, the more you share about yourself, the more it can be used against you. So when they're with peers or when they're with others, young people are masking some of the most important parts of who they are. And then that's a finding, but also what we're learning about these methods is that the young people are talking about how they could communicate these parts with their peers in ways that they hadn't before. And I just wanted to show you this final project of a young person talking about belonging and writing about it. You'll notice what this individual is wearing is a mask. We found young people referencing how they mask things and using the tool of expression, if you will, throughout their work. So it's really been helping young people voice their experiences in their communities and their schools and their struggles and search for belonging. Another method that we did that was super fun for all involved was the sound narrative, where we had young people walk along a community in many ways. With one group, we did it in their school. To another group, imagine we took them, they live in the more suburban, urban part of the county. We went to a more rural, if you will, small town part, which is what this photo is from, where they felt it was very different from where they lived. And they walked around the community. We walked near them to keep them safe. And they narrated their experience. So they were like, oh, this, as you see in this picture, what is this? What the F? And they just narrated how they felt in that space. And then after having an opportunity to document that, and then they're asked to take pictures throughout the way. And then you switch with a peer headphones or switch your devices, kept your headphones, and then they retrace their peer steps. So they had this empathetic experience walking in the shoes of their peers. So this photo here was a catapult to this discussion about what do guns and Christianity have anything to do with each other. The young person actually who walked by this like ran away. It felt like he felt unsafe. And it was a catapult for a discussion of, I suppose, the politics of the community and how they felt and fit within that. We also felt that, that in these sound narratives, people are beginning to develop empathy, which is a goal of the youth program. For example, one of our 4-H programs has this partnership with this big facility where actually soldiers do training or police officers do training. And they have like a bed and they have like a training facility, and the young people walk by, and this young person saw this teddy bear and said, oh, that shows that the people weren't just soldiers, but they were actual real people, like having some compassion and a different understanding of people who live a life totally different from her own. And then finally, without going into it too much, young people do a final showcase of the work and the art that they've created throughout the time of this program, which varied in time. And this is a digital story that this young person made. And what we're finding, and that we're going to dig in more, that above all else, as we look at a youth program situated to meet a need in the community, which is to address social divisions, racial divisions, foster belonging as young people are moving to new spaces. I'll forgive the typo there. That the art is really offering young people and supporting young people and having public dialogue around their experiences with critical community issues, which is the whole point. So I could go off on cultural identity, belonging in schools, social media, all these conversations that the young people express that we've never really talked about in this way before, or thought about in this way, and that the art was helping them express that. And for this young woman to show, a young person in this group said later, I didn't know so-and-so was Native until this project. And then she was able to share a bit about herself, and the young people were able to learn from her through this artwork. And I just love this young person when we're having a dialogue, just pausing like, whoa, hang on. I'm thinking about these things for the first time right now through this work. And so for me, that's the biggest, the most important thing. We'll be learning a lot. We'll be analyzing the data. But again, for someone who also identifies mostly and who's charged to build with youth programs to make a difference in the lives of young people, before I'm charged to produce new knowledge, to help young people develop tools to engage in critical thinking to the attention of change makers, members in their community. We're finding really effective ways to do that through arts-based methods. And then to conclude is that because I'm with Extension, and this is something we can talk about more, it is my goal and it's been my mission to sustain this program within the Extension system. So it becomes like a 4-H program that people can do for years to come. So we are, a couple things to do that, right? We are developing a practitioner guide that can guide them through some of the things I talked to you about and give them ideas on how to do that and really step them through that. And that's something we can make publicly available. Forgive me. And we also work with community partners nonstop. So for example, one of our programs we did in partnership with an art class in a high school that is situated in the fastest growing city in Minnesota that's experiencing a lot of growth and diversity. This is now we're going to train the teachers as part of their curriculum from here on forward. And we've been using this to develop other community partners in other communities that are rapidly growing, experiencing changes in their community. And this is a tool for those community members. So again, we have a lot to analyze and to learn and to present on. But right now I wanted to share with you really is the methods, the difference it's making in the young people, developing empathy, trust and understanding with people who are new to them, and then helping empower communities to have something that's theirs to keep, and we facilitate that. And that's really the goal. Exit and stop sharing my screen, and we can have a conversation. So.
Okay. Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation. Time within 30 minutes you've been allocated. So now it's Professor Mikateko to discuss your presentation.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you, Joanna. What can you hear me?
Not as clear as it was before, so I will let you know if I can't understand.
Okay. All right. I'll just try to speak up. Thank you so much for your presentation. As somebody who uses participatory methods and arts-based methods, it's really lovely to hear how you are implementing these and also doing so in a way that has impact. So not just focusing on the academic side of things, as you said, producing outputs that are also accessible to the public and so on, which I think is really, really important. So I'm just going to ask a few questions. Most of them will be about how you approach what you do. So the first question is about your approach in identifying problems in the communities that you work in. And I'm interested in how you identify these problems because in using participatory methods ourselves, we often have to be very careful that we don't go in with a paternalistic type of approach. So I'm wondering how you identify the specific challenges, problems, etc. in the communities that you work with, and how do you avoid sort of top-down ways of identifying these problems. Another question is about the lasting impact. So I heard you talking about sustaining the program, and I wondered if past participants, so young people who've been recipients or participants of these various programs that you've been running, if they go on to become program managers or if they implement some of what they've learned from your programs, are they involved in training others and so on? So as to ask the question about lasting impact, but also how you think about impact in a broader sense. So I heard you talking about in this particular project, empathy, developing critical thinking, as well as young people developing trust and understanding in terms of getting to know people who they might not have had the opportunity to interact with before. So how do you conceptualize impact in broader terms? So not just when you're thinking about this particular project that you were talking about. Another question has to do with the adaptation process that you employ when you're working with participatory methods. I recently examined a master's thesis, I think it was, and somebody was using photo voice, but I realized that there were so many steps in the photo voice process that they left out. So for instance, there wasn't a kind of final selection of the photographs to develop a kind of narrative for each participant. There wasn't an exhibition at the end of the process, and I was wondering, if it's supposed to result in public engagement, then why did they leave out the exhibition? But I understand that these methodologies are open and creative for a reason, so there is room for flexibility. When you adapt these processes, for you, how far is too far? Because of course it's in the process that certain skills are developed, that certain lessons are learned. So I'm just trying to understand how you deal with the challenge of not tweaking things too much so that there's something lost in the process of the methodology. And then another question has to do with the young people you work with and their aspirations for higher education. So when you do, I know that it's not the purpose of the work that you do, but in working with them, when they talk about their futures, or if they're talking about the communities in which they live and how they'd like to see things evolve, do they talk about aspirations for higher education? So how much does that feature in their narratives of what they would like to see happening in the future? So yeah, those are all my questions. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk.
Thank you for such good questions. And I like now that I can see all your faces. I wasn't made for the virtual world. I love, of course, we're so far, but I love being able to see faces in that room. So, and if I don't, I tried to write as many down, but please interrupt and steer me a different way if I'm not fully answering what your first question was. But your first question was around how do we identify the critical issues in the community and the problems that. So it's a process, an imperfect process, but I mean, so broadly, and especially with Extension, when we engage and work with communities, especially these are young people I was not already previously working with, right? So it's a twofold process of one, just understanding the news. I mean, a lot of this, we came to this community because they were literally on the news twice, with some one was a sporting event, a hockey game where there was a racial epitaph, set on camera and things like that. So we knew this was a spot that was working on things, and their city and their governments were very, very out loud working on it. We also, I'll just say from the 4-H perspective, with our rural roots, it's also our job to know where we're not. So maybe this isn't identifying a critical issue, but identifying we're meant to serve all young people in all places. And in this county, we were more with the rural agricultural youth, and we didn't have programming in the more suburban, less rural aspect of the area. And so we knew that was not okay and was something we want to address. And then we also have a process of understanding, again, just demographics, who's where and what's the school, who's where. So that's the less fun part, I would say, where we're not engaging with the young people. But the most important part that we do is we have community meetings ahead of time, possible community partners, people in the schools, people in the city government, to hear their stories, and then eventually connect us with the young people. And then the whole youth program in and of itself is fostered around that. So we don't come in and say, hey, we're going to talk about, we talk about belonging, right? But we're going to talk about, immigration today, or we're going to talk about healthcare. None of that. It was opportunities for young people. The questions were always framed around things that you care about, things that make you feel like you belong, or things that you make you feel most supported. And then we let the youth lead it from there. And then they identified the issues, for example, of the nature was a huge one, that they just felt like everything was so busy and that they didn't belong in school, but they can just get out in these small little parks they had. Or there was one school too where they just felt like the teachers didn't care about them, but there was one room called we don't have a pseudonym for it yet, but there was one room that was geared for young people who were experiencing obstacles or barriers that they felt was like their place. And then it was a struggle, right? Because they said, well, they say I don't have enough problems to be in this room anymore. So I lost my favorite place in school. So the young people, through the dialogue, through the methods, were able to identify the issues that matter to them. And we were also helping them think about the issues that matter to them. So long-winded way is say, we engage, we understand what's happening in the community broadly. We have a series of one-to-one meetings. That's where I say I'm a community organizer. Usually I have some connection, but I will say I'm Joanna or I'm so-and-so if I'm working with a colleague, and we have community conversations. And now it's floodgates. Like I keep getting connected to people to hear more stories in the community and where this program has a place. But it's really important, especially through our methods, and we keep making it better, that as we're engaging with young people, that their voices are the foreground of the work. I should go on. You had a question about lasting impacts. Well, first of all, should I pause? Any questions, comments, follow-ups? So to your point about lasting impacts, and I think you said something about like, how do you conceptualize impact and sustainability? It's a really good question with many, many answers. And I've learned through my career that sustainability and impact is going to look different. Oops, there you are. So there's a couple things. We are looking for individual youth impact, right? Like, so that's one thing that we hope the young people are developing skills, or are developing empathy, trust, and civic skills. The other impact is really just the sustainability of a program that we know can make a difference. So for example, the school is building this into the curriculum, and like 15 years from now, say it's still going, you know, I'm not still following the youth, making sure, but to me, that's an impact too, right? Where they now have a research-based program with impact that we're showing, that with evidence-based practices, that is now part of their everyday practice. So this is like for communities and, you know, to come, we'll have this tool. And that's why it's important that like we build the practitioner guide, right? So it's deliverable by others. And then, oh, I had a follow-up question to that. I'll leave it at that. We have youth impact, and we want to make sure the community has the tools to carry this out without the presence of the university. And I lost my train of thought. I have one more question on impact. Okay, I'll come back to that if you have follow-ups. The other thing that you asked was about the adaptation of photo voice, sort of doing it with fidelity is what I'm understanding, and how we can. So, you know, I mentioned early on about messiness. It's youth program first. You know, the research, we do what we can to build our skills and make it work. But for example, our first thing with photo voice, the kids kept not bringing in their photos. Like they just didn't do it at first because for whatever reason, right? In one of our programs. And so that took away from our time with them to maybe follow through with your point. Exactly, you said there wasn't like a final selection. There wasn't, but that was our reality. You can't go back and like make them do the photos that they didn't follow through on, right? So there were times we just had to adapt. Like I have a portfolio of things that we did an activity that day that didn't involve photos around, that was out of a curriculum. And so I don't have a good answer because I actually wish we could have done it, but you can't, you've got to just be in the reality of what is with youth program. People might show up, or the person that came the one time doesn't come back for whatever reason. And to sort of, to prioritize fidelity over like community engagement and trust. I mean, that's just sort of what I live by, is to make sure that we're just, the young people have good experiences. And so I'm not too concerned over fidelity to it. But then I will say that the more we build trust in communities, or more like we're still kind of we're just past piloting. It's only our second, third iteration, right? I think the more we have community leaders who are leading it more than us, who know the young people better and maybe have more trust, I think we'll have more opportunities, especially with a written curriculum, that there is that fidelity and follow through. And that reminds me too of the other thing you said about like presenting to the stakeholders, right? That happened in some and not in others, or it happened in different ways. I'd like to see that happen more, but as we do this further, right? So we did showcases where people came, where the young people presented, and I'm okay that there wasn't a sudden in that moment, like systems change and this decision maker is changing the way they're doing school. That'll be the dream long term. But again, I think long term. So my goal right now is to just develop capacity of community members to deliver a program like this, with the impacts growing as that capacity grows. Okay. Oh, and you have one more question that I'll answer briefly, about their aspirations for higher ed. Yes. Given that's my passion, it wasn't the topic of this, but especially, I don't know, I'd love to hear about your context, but in rural parts of our state too, young people have these aspirations. They feel like they have to leave to chase their aspirations. And so this young man, I can't remember what he said that he wanted to do. He's like, I love where I live. I love that my mom's here. This is perfect for my parents who came as immigrants. They worked at the factory that was here. But the university I want to go to is in the cities, and it would be far away, and I'd have to leave my mom. And so that's the tension in these areas, about having to leave to pursue aspirations that they have for themselves. And I think that's a real tension to think about, because they don't want to leave their families, or they don't want to leave the community where there's that nature where they feel like they most belong, right? There's certain pieces of that that's really important. So that was one big theme that came up, is the tension of where I live and where I belong versus like what my individual aspirations are. And I'll stop there. I could go on, but I want to make sure there's time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. So we are welcoming members, either online or present here, to ask questions. You can take 3 questions, then we'll allow you to respond to those questions. Thank you. Oh, Carmen, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi. Let me lower my hand.
Yes.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much for the and thank you for bringing us many ideas, right, of future practices. I think, yeah, it's really enlightening to hear this particular case study and how you've been mixing different methods to capture similar perspectives. I have a question and a comment. My first question is about a bit more of the demographics. I think we get a sense more or less what are the tensions in the community, but I was wondering if the divisions in the community are more ideological, religious, cultural, or socioeconomic in general. I will be interested in that. From your examples, I can see that there is some immigration, but I was also wondering with the US if it's also ideological and religious as well. That will be my question, to know a bit more about the diversity that you're tackling there. And then my comment is something that has been worrying me a bit, or I've been thinking lately, because it's something that we have learned from feminist studies when they work only at the individual level, or when they work mainly with women and not men in communities. And I think if we extrapolate this to cases of youth, what I can gather is that in this program, you really give a huge importance to kind of self-awareness and personal development. And I think, you clearly highlighted saying that the aim is individual youth impact, right? The focus is on that. But that think about, generating a highly critical mass in a conservative community. And that's why I wanted to know more about the issues of diversity in the community. And of course, this make me think about, whether methods that are extremely focused on the individual and this kind of self-awareness are perhaps not well connected with the larger structures, and they can be somehow emphasize oppressions, for instance, in the ideas of social anxiety, that this is recognized at the individual level, but not connected with larger issues of structural issues, right? Of xenophobia, racism, and exclusion, right? So, of course, I know you haven't, you were not presenting about everything in the program, so I'm quite sure there are a lot of details that we have missed today in your presentation. But I will be curious about, how in the program, you're tackling these issues of connecting this self-awareness with the general issues of xenophobia and racism that are somehow interlinked and relate to each other. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Carmen. So important, and I recognize the time, so I'll do my best to be brief. And I'll just say this too: I would love to connect with anyone. I think my email's out there to follow up, because I would love to learn from all of you as well. So to go backwards, for your comments on the individual connected to larger structures and systems, I think it's really important. And I'll just emphasize, we aim to do that, and I think we did in many ways. It's their sense of belonging, understanding, and their connection to others, but within their community, right? And so when they did the photo voice, one thing is how does this photo help identify ways that our community can change, right? Or the other thing is that we learned in one of the photo voice, one thing I meant to emphasize and I glossed over is the importance. We had trained youth workers delivering, I trained a youth worker to deliver these, and I was there with some, but the young people were kind of giving rosy pictures of their community. My community's great, we love it. And she was like, okay, hold up, stop. And then she had everyone get in a circle and just, I don't have time to go into, but it was brilliant youth work brilliance, right? To have young people step forward if maybe parts of your experience aren't represented here. Because I think many of you doing research and whatever kind with young people, they so often tell adults what they think adults want to hear, which is why having these methods that disrupt that as much as you can is important. And I would say also having a skilled youth worker who can name it, pause it, disrupt what we're doing because it wasn't working in the moment, to authenticate youth voices and their experiences with racism. That room, then we got to talk about, yeah, all the white kids get to go in that room, but then we always get in trouble and in detention. And it took that trust and that developing of a good culture with that youth worker that really fostered those discussions. So the tools, the methods are there to foster those conversations around systems and structures. And also having someone who's skilled in being able to facilitate such complicated issues is really important. I'll leave it there. Brief question, thank you. I did kind of gloss over the demographics. I love to talk forever. So brevity is not my strength. So I never know what to take out in a presentation. But the demographics, what we strive for was to represent the changing diversity of the communities we worked in. And we didn't always get that right completely. And meaning, but in our last one, so when one of our sessions, it was almost all Somali youth in a community that has a growing Somali population, but a lot of white, rural, and lower SES. And the goal was to bring all these young people together in different rooms. And that didn't happen as much. It was still meaningful in many ways to have those young people have those conversations. And it was actually kind of interesting in that session where there were 3 white people, including myself, in a room of 20. And so we all left during prayer time, right? And the young people were like, we're not used to I don't know, it was again a good experience. And then the most recent one that we finished in the school really did represent the changing diversity. We had a young person identified as Native American, a young person whose family's immigration from Cambodia, one young white girl who had moved 12 times in the last 5 years and living with her grandmother, all these diverse experiences. And you saw these methods with these young people never talking to each other. Like I said, I didn't know if so-and-so was American Indian. I didn't know that. So The idea was to represent those in the county, and the engagement and recruitment takes time. And I'll just say this, we're there now. We're ready for the next iteration. Sorry, 601. Shouldn't have kept going. Happy to talk more later.
Okay,
601. 101 for you. Sorry.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation and your response. We look forward to get further with you on your work. So, yeah, can we take one or two questions?
Just a comment to Joanna that I think you're definitely doing interesting work, and I'm interested in just maybe one or two challenges that you've experienced using these methods. Besides
only one or two?
Sorry?
I said only one or two.
Or more.
I'll tell you the biggest challenge off the bat that I actually was so stressed about, because a lot of it too was not just doing this project, but also really trying to build 4-H youth development and helping them diversify, them build new skills and building new community partners. So this county where we're at, the person who I engaged, who was the extension employee, who actually then went on to a new job, so that was another challenge. Was like, yeah, I'm all in. We're gonna, and I recognized early on she didn't have the skills in community engagement to work in the community and invite new community partners into reach and engage with young people who are not already engaged in the program. And I struggled with I felt like I was the nexus between, working with the research team. And I'm also in the extension trying to help. It wasn't my program. I wanted it to be the community's program and the local 4-H program. And so she wasn't successfully engaging participants and community partners. And I think I should have mentored better. And I regret that, but it's a dance. And even to your point about fidelity with the methods, what we care most about is having a good relationship in the community and building something organically and authentically. And so, so for example, with the engagement and recruitment, I didn't want to just say, we're doing this research project, the grant timeline is this, you got to get the participants right, but that was part of in my mind. And so our first pilot that we abbreviated only had 2 young people. And then I came in more, and then we got the 20, and then we got another group of 13. So that was my first early on struggle, is just building it and getting the engagement, because I wanted it to belong to the programs and not to the research project, right? All of us sort of driving with this research question. Other obstacles, I think then too, is just, I'm okay with it, but as is living in the messiness of it and having things not go right, having kids not show up or not do what maybe they said they're going to do, or and just being okay with being flexible with it and just knowing everything is data. We did a really good job, I think, too, of really good field notes and our observations as a research team. We debrief afterwards and talk about like things that went wrong or didn't go well. I don't know, because we're working with young people who have lives and different things. And so, yeah, I had to make an activity about pretending an alien is moving to your school. How would you tell them to belong? It's from a curriculum, because kids didn't show up with their photos, even though they had plenty of time, right? So just dealing with those tensions, I suppose.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, and now.
Is it time? Joanna.
Oh no.
Can you hear me?
I can now, but you're frozen. Maybe come up. Okay, try again. I hear you again.
You described some interesting methods, and I'm interested to know, do you go into a project with preconceived notion of the method you will use, or is that done as part of a participatory action with the group, or does it evolve as you start as the project goes?
Yes and yes. So we had a plan, right? We had the photo voice, so we documented how we wanted to do that. We had the sound narrative. And then we also had to like have it evolve to meet the needs of the group. And so there were times too where we ended up just having like a discussion group with the kids because I felt like they needed to just talk. So we had things planned, everything was planned. But then things don't always go to plan and you had to be ready to, we always had curriculum in our back pocket to use, especially the day when people weren't showing up with their photos, for example, like we had to be ready and still make sure they had a good learning experience. Yeah, I mean, I can go into it more if you can, but it was a lot was evolved, like the mask activity. We didn't do that the first round in the pilot, but we felt like they needed more, we learned like, how it's called, like a downtime almost, like less engaging, like they interacted, but then they had time to just like draw and create. And that was like a nice kind of early activity for them to do. So that wasn't part of our early plan. And then we brought it in later because we found like we needed more of an icebreaker, if you will, a elongated icebreaker.
Thank you. Chimwemwe.
So I see this chat. Okay, specifically on how you manage participants using images to misrepresent a situation. I'm not sure if I can answer that part of it, but if that occurred, but the process of interpreting pictures was, I mentioned briefly that there was, and I can show you, I don't want to pull up the slide, it'll be too clunky, that drawing from other photo voice stories, and forgive me for not having the citation off the top of my head right now, that the young people did like they captioned their photo with a process of describing what's happening, what do you think it says, and so that was one part of them already doing their own interpretation of their own photo and what it means. And then we went through that candy coding process where they put like pictures of nature, pictures of classroom, pictures of family, however they chose to code it, and then their interpretation. So I believe that's the question. Like they began making their own interpretations of their photos was when we put it up on that wall and we asked them to say, pretend you're writing a newspaper headline, like what does this story say about your community and what do you want people to know? What is this showing? And so they'd say the blank room is where young people feel in this school that they don't have to, that they can just be themselves. And then so they provided meaning to it. And then and I think the only other part of that process important to say is having that skilled youth worker to help young people sort of feel that vulnerability and to go deeper with their interpretations and being authentic with how they feel about certain spaces of belonging in their community.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for your presentation, and we look forward to engage further with you on the topic. We are running short of time, and we can discuss. We can discuss among ourselves. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Okay, members.